Our God and God of our fathers and mothers, remember us and bless us. May our people, the people called by your name, both in the land of Israel and scattered throughout the world, know your mercy and kindness, your love and joy through Mashiach Yeshua, your provision for our redemption. We read in the Passover Haggadah, in every generation they rise up against us to annihilate us, but the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us from their hand. This morning I'd like to speak to you about the message of Pesach, which is freedom. 4,000 years ago, our people left the bondage of Egypt. After the long night of servitude and misery, we were finally free, almost. But the road to becoming a free people in our own land was to be circuitous. It was a road that would test our faith and resolve and God's patience over and over again. Hashem, for reasons which are clearly given in Torah, but only in retrospect, didn't bring us directly to the land by the shortest route and the least traveling time. Instead, He chose to take us by an indirect route through the wilderness and had us set up camp by the Reed Sea. Naturally, of course, Pharaoh had his scouts observing the situation. He thought he detected weakness in us. After all, we had been his slaves for hundreds of years, and he calculated that we were lost and thus easy prey for his army. His concern was with getting his slaves back and maybe killing some of us in the process as revenge for the plagues. He undoubtedly wanted to show us, and even more, he wanted to show our God, who is truly sovereign. But he should have known better. After his experience with the plagues, as he had seen his nation unaccountably devastated, but he was still sure of himself, so he sent his troops after us. And when we saw the Egyptian army approaching, we were utterly terrified. We forgot everything that God had already done for us. There we were, between Pharaoh and the sea. What could we do? To whom could we turn for help? What would become of us? Fast forward to 2020. Today, our backs are still at the sea, and our enemies are still breathing down our necks. Consider what you've read or heard about Israel in the last 6 months. Israel is being hauled up before the court of public opinion, the UN, the EU, what difference does it make, for yet another attack on the poor Palestinians, a non-existent nation made up of Arabs from around the Middle East who mock those who support them. Who wants to be seen as Israel's friend? And anti-Semitism is rife in Europe, in the UK, and in the US. Some have even said that the coronavirus was started by the Israelis. Of course, we're responsible for everything. Back to the Red Sea dilemma. Faced with annihilation or a return to slavery, our people were understandably in a panic. And then Moshe spoke these powerful words. Listen to them carefully. Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Wow. And we should remember all these years later that the same God who split the sea so that we could walk through on dry land, that same God, the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the God of Israel, is with us today, and he defends Israel as he did then. He's with us in each one of these difficult situations that we face. And so, as we begin the celebration of the festival of Pesach in 2020, as we did on Wednesday night, we need to look carefully at the Pesach story, the narrative of Pesach. On the one hand, we know that Pesach has required early and lengthy preparations to be made in all observant Jewish homes, made more difficult and complicated by distancing and self-isolation. When God commanded us to rid our homes of chametz, he knew that we would have to do some hard physical work. God knew that his requirements would only be kept by those who sincerely desired to please him and walk in covenant with him. But it's not physical preparedness alone that is required of us. Clearly, we must each make spiritual preparations as well. For us, the physical and the spiritual are always closely linked, as God's requirements connect the two in so many different ways. This is especially true in the celebration of Shabbat and our festivals. I don't know about you, but when I pray for someone, I always include my concern for their spiritual, physical, emotional, intellectual, and financial well-being. But spiritual always comes first. On Pesach, we celebrate the liberation of our people from Egyptian slavery, as well as liberation from and rejection of Egyptian paganism and the way of life of the Olam Hazeh, that is the world we live in, the abominations of Egypt. As we celebrate Pesach each year, there's a timely lesson and message for each individual Jew of whatever age or background. The story of Pesach is the narrative of God's intervention in the lives of our people, not only then, but through the ages and today. We know what is happening in the outside world, but it should not impact us because we have experienced God's emancipation. We are liberated from the contingencies of the world's agenda, even if we are still subject to the conditions of the Olam Hazeh. The lesson of Pesach is emphasized by the three principal symbols of the Seder, which Hillel tells us we must always make mention of. In fact, we do more than make mention of them. We must explain their significance and make them central to our celebration, or we have not observed the Seder appropriately. And these, of course, are the Pesach lamb, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs. These three elements demonstrate that we can avoid bitterness in our lives only through the Pesach lamb. As catastrophe falls upon our enemies, we are driven to remove ourselves from a place of perversion and darkness to one under God's care, a place of redemption and holiness, consecration and shalom. Celebration of the festival of freedom must always be connected with the commandment, "You shall tell your children." Our homes are basic to our peoplehood, to our identity as Jews. The formation of the Jewish home is dependent upon the upbringing of the next generation, both the wise and the wicked, a temporary state, we hope, the simple, and the one who does not even know what to ask. There seem to be so many of them like that today. We must be faithful to our responsibility to our children, as well as to those taking steps to enter into covenant Judaism. It's our duty to live out Torah until we see next year in Jerusalem become a reality. On the other hand, every Pesach there is another miracle. On the 8th of April, 2020, something truly miraculous happened in spite of the current restrictions and complications. What was this miraculous event, you ask? It was simply that the majority of Jews around the world took part in a Seder, celebrating Pesach alone or with family members. This percentage included religious Jews, secular Jews, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox Jews, Jews who are in shul every week, Jews who never go to shul, Jews who don't believe in God or in chosenness. For one night, most of us recalled our people's exodus from Egypt, even if we believe it is a myth. Why? What is the real message of Passover? What makes it so compelling for all Jews? Think about the deeper message here. It has become popular for most of our people to say that the message of Pesach is freedom. We were slaves, now we're free. Surely that is a message that all people everywhere can appreciate. But if that's all there is, Passover would have ceased to be a significant holiday and would have become more like Purim or Hanukkah, a celebration of a victory thousands of years ago, even if some of us think it's a myth. But Pesach is much more than that. It's about faith. It's about our fundamental beliefs, about our identity as Jews and those who are committed to becoming Jews. As I've already quoted from the Mishnah, each generation is obligated to view themselves personally as having been redeemed from the slavery of Egypt. We are commanded to tell the story of the first Pesach as if it were our own. Why? Well, first of all, because it is. Pesach connects us with God, even those of us who say we don't believe in God. As we recite, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt in order to be your God. Redemption from Egypt was purposeful. We were not delivered from the oppression of Egypt so that we could be free to do whatever we chose. We were redeemed and liberated so that we would choose to serve our God, to follow his commandments, and to live as his covenant people. And so Pesach is about emunah. It's about faith. The most effective path toward faith is by way of direct personal experience. Having been with friends and family in Israel and making new friends, on Pesach, we rejoice in what God has accomplished for our people. And we see the importance and centrality of Israel to our national identity, and this is incomparably greater than it might have been if we only read about Israel, especially if we only read about it in the scriptures. I can tell you that personally, no book would have brought me to the same level of understanding as the experience of sitting in the home of my father's cousin who survived the Shoah. If you have not been to Israel yet, or if you've gone previously, I would say go. Confirm your personal commitment to the land that God has given us. Even if we live in the UK, Israel is our land, our heritage, and our future. In the same way, it is important that our seders be brought to life by making them personal to each one of us. I've attended seders recited by heart in Hebrew where no one fully comprehended what was being said, including the speaker. This sort of experience does little to make a personal connection possible. Likewise, with seders at which motivation to read through the Haggadah at record speed seemed dominated by hunger. Although pleasant enough family gatherings with great food, these experiences do little to connect those present with genuine faith. Pesach is about identity, peoplehood, and our covenant with God. Celebrating Pesach strengthens our Jewish identity, our relationship with the God who created us as a people, from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, whom he called Israel. We recite, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, instead of, I am the Lord your God who created you. Pesach and the Exodus narrative is strategic to our faith because we are celebrating the establishment of the nation of Israel, the only people created and set aside by covenant with the one and only God. Before the Exodus and the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the nation of Israel did not exist. We were the 12 tribes descended from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Not until we left Egypt and received the Torah did we become the unique people of God's creation and choosing, created for His purpose. And so, Passover is a celebration of peoplehood and of our unique relationship with God. This, no doubt, was a part of God's intention when He made Pesach, the first holy day after Shabbat, such an important festival, of which we're reminded throughout the year because so many times during the year at our various celebrations, we speak of our liberation from Egypt. One of the most common reoccurring phrases in Torah is, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. We celebrate our uniqueness. We have been strangers in many places, not just Egypt. And we've experienced the consequences of seeming strange to others. In fact, God never intended us to be comfortable anywhere but in our own land, the land He gave to our fathers and to us. But the story itself carries a universal message as we are admonished to treat sojourners, those who are becoming part of us through conversion, to treat them well based in our own experience as sojourners in Egypt. This requires kindness to those who are other than ourselves, as Rav Yeshua reminds us in his parable of the Good Samaritan. It encourages us to welcome those who are other to become part of us, acknowledging our God, the God of the Scriptures, as their God, and the covenant relationship with God as applicable to them. Likewise, as we were slaves in Egypt, abused, mistreated, poor, and hated, so we as a people and as individuals are to show concern for those in similar circumstances. 36 times we are reminded that we were slaves in Egypt. This is why Jews have tended to be at the forefront of such movements as the civil rights movement in the States and in South Africa. I have already mentioned that freedom in the Pesach story is not simply a freedom from oppression, freedom from living in fear, but more than that, it is a freedom to serve God and His purpose. Most of us, when we say freedom, think of freedom from being told what to do, freedom to go where you choose, to do what you like, even freedom to live where you want to live. But this kind of freedom is associated with hedonism, immortalized by Janis Joplin, some of you will remember her, in the song Bobby McGee, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. This sort of freedom is empty, purposeless, mindless, and it wears thin rather quickly. And we should remember that after the miracle at the sea, when we escaped from the Egyptians, the first thing we did was to complain about the terrible living conditions in the desert, begging to go back to Egypt. However, freedom from is a necessary precondition for freedom to. We had to be liberated from the demands of pagan Egypt, physically and spiritually, in order to be free to serve God. As you and I remember the Exodus and the narrative of Pesach, we need to be free from whatever our Egypt is, our evil inclination, the influences of the world around us, our own desires and proclivities, in order to be able to serve our God. Most of us need to learn to say, Dayenu, enough. As long as making money or advancing your career is on your agenda, ahead of taking time with God, for synagogue, for those things you would undoubtedly claim as more important, you are still a slave. The handcuffs may be golden or they may be steel. They may even seem pleasant, but you are not free. In Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers, we read, "Who is wise?" The answer, the one who is content with his lot. Certainly, that is a word for us today as we sit in our homes listening to this message. When we have achieved the essentials of freedom from, then and only then are we ready to proceed with freedom to. Only at this stage do we have the freedom, the discernment, and the capacity to begin to serve God fully by keeping His mitzvot, His commandments, following His halakha, His way of life, living in the way that was modeled by Rav Yeshua. At the end of the week, as we leave Pesach behind and move forward toward Shavuot, we will certainly find many opportunities to serve God. As you think about this year's Seder, remember that this holiday is not just about celebrating freedom from enslavement. Think about why God wanted us to be free, why He released us from Egyptian slavery. Think about how you are going to use the freedom God has given you to celebrate your deepening and expanding relationship with Him, something for which most of us have more time at the moment. Let's take advantage of that and really enjoy our time with the Lord. Shabbat Shalom.